Welcome to The Drummer's Pathway, the podcast about music, life, and the creative process. Hello, I'm Michael Scott, and welcome to the Drummer's Pathway podcast, where we explore the personal and professional journeys of drummers, educators, and artists who've committed their lives to creativity and the arts. This episode features the return of Matthew Crouse and Zack Albetta from the Working Drummer podcast for another roundtable discussion. With over 500 episodes, the Working Drummer podcast has become an essential source for those interested in what it's like to have a career as a professional drummer. Renowned for their in-depth interviews with an emphasis on telling the stories of the artists who may not always be a household name, they have developed a loyal audience longing for honest stories and perspectives about making a living as a musician. In our conversation, we explore the value of building genuine connections, embracing your career journey, and why these conversations are essential for learning from others' experiences and growing your community. And now, let's get started with my roundtable conversation with Matthew Crouse and Zack Albetta. So I just want to say, going back a couple of years is the first time we had an opportunity to connect when I was early on in my podcast journey. And since then, I just want to thank both of you for being so supportive and encouraging and for sort of, in a lot of ways, mentoring me through this process, because your involvement and your friendship means a significant amount to me, and it's significantly changed how I do things, and I'm constantly looking back at the standards that you set, because I truly believe that your podcast sort of sets the standards and that we all try and achieve for. So I'm incredibly grateful for your friendship and your support.
Oh man, thanks for saying that. And likewise, you're always messaging me about, episodes that you've listened to of ours, and have always just been so supportive of our podcast, and really free. You're really free with the positive feedback, which is so important for us.
Well, and to me, the biggest thing I've gotten out of this experience is community. When I started a podcast, I wasn't really sure what it was that I was trying to do or what I was going to gain from this. And what I got out of this experience was just building a genuine community, building some significant friendships. And through those experiences and through those connections is where you start to realize your value and your worth. And all of the efforts that you put into this start to come back to you, and then you start to realize the importance of being genuine to your vision, because we all have stories about following a path, being a professional musician, because that's what we figured is expected of us. And we all know that sometimes when you do these things, you start to realize the things you don't want to do and the things that you're actually passionate about. And I think we all at this point are choosing to follow the path that we're passionate about rather than the path that we feel is expected of us. And so I'm interested to kind of get into what you guys have been up to over the last little while and how your perspectives on your career has changed.
Yeah, if I could just address what you said at the beginning there. So first of all, thank you, Michael. And I think at the forefront is developing relationships and friendships and shedding that notion that we're all in competition with each other and you have to kind of fend off any type of somebody that's trying to get your gig, or if someone is succeeding, it's because you're not succeeding. So if there's anything that I've learned so much from this podcast, the most important thing for me is I have a new way of seeing my peers and where I fit in the music industry. And it allows me to kind of just let my shoulders down, relax, really enjoy, go back to the root of what it was that drew me to music and to drums. Because when you start doing it professionally, there's expectations and there's a lot of pressure and there's a lot of people that don't understand the industry. And so you're dealing with that, whether it's friends or family, well-intentioned people that are trying to guide you.
I'll interject that a lot of those expectations and a lot of that pressure comes from within.
Yes. Within. within. And so demystifying this all through conversation, through people that I'm like seem untouchable. You're like, you find out, oh my gosh, they have the same vision of, they have the same desires of life as I do, and concerns, and so yeah, it's been good. So I think when we met, I was already at that place. So I think that when I meet people that like yourself or Dan Ainspan from National Drummers Podcast that want to start a podcast or do things, they're like, is this okay? I don't want to compete with, and I'm like, you're not competing. We're creating community.
Yes.
And it just serves us all to support each other, not only obviously in the podcasting community, but that transcends into the drumming community, the music community, and stuff like that.
Well, I know that one of Zach's most hated words is networking. And people always talk of this industry in terms of, in order to develop and build a career, you have to network. And I don't know how to network. But what I've learned is I have an ability to actually build genuine connections. And through this experience, starting a podcast, I've reached out to people that I genuinely thought I should not have access to, but I'm at least going outside of my comfort zone and sending a message to let them know what I'm doing and to extend the invitation. And the irony is that the level of guests that I've been able to get on my show just blows my mind in terms of just the kindness and the friendships. And I have previous, high-end guests that are sending me emails of their friends that they want to have on the show as well. So I'm looking at this going, I shouldn't have access to this person, but yet it's all because you're building genuine communities. And I find for me, I've kept in touch with many people because I'm going through my own life stuff, and then you deal with the aspects of imposter syndrome, and you're starting to doubt your capabilities or whether it's worth the effort, or you run into that comparison trap. And so I reach out to people who are my friends that happen to be previous guests. And then when you have people that are icons lifting you up and telling you that you have some value and worth, that's a very humbling experience. But I've learned that you can't do this yourself. You have to reach out, you have to share your stories, because everyone else has their own stuff. And when you can open that dialogue and open that communication, that is what empowers you to be able to overcome those obstacles and just keep on going, because you know that what you're doing has value and people see worth in that, and it allows you to start to see value in yourself.
For sure. For sure. I like what Matt said about just letting your shoulders down, because over the 10 years we've been doing this podcast, it's been a slow process for me, and it hasn't been a straight line. But the net result of it has been just a lot more sort of security in who I am as a drummer and as a person, and just sort of contentment and security in the knowledge that my path is my path, and it's not anyone else's, and it can't be anyone else's. And it's, it's enabled me to sort of set a lot of things down, and they still rear their heads sometimes, but yeah.
Can I add also to that is when you let your shoulders down and you kind of don't judge yourself so much, you allow for more information to happen. You allow for more honest relationships and connections to people that you can learn from and grow from. Because when you put that wall up, as I did, then you keep that growth from happening. You arrest that development, if you will, by just feeling comfortable with watching and listening to other players, whether it's them playing, them talking, them sharing their stories, things like that. And it's like, oh my gosh, I learned so much from this person that I was afraid to talk to, or that, I don't know, for whatever reason. And yeah.
It's interesting because over the last year, I've gotten myself in a sort of a cover band situation that's been very positive, and the relationships that I have with the people in the band have been great. And a lot of them are people I've worked with and known for a really long time. But what was supposed to be an occasional thing became a very popular thing. And then I found my calendar was starting to fill beyond what it was that I wanted to do. And I suffered from, the stress of trying to manage my life and my career and what I wanted. So I actually, sent an email, took a bold step back from the band on a very positive thing. And I encouraged them to just keep, the momentum going. And they worked out some different situations. And then because we had open, honest discussions, I ended up getting my gig back, and they've adjusted everything to sort of fit what works for me, because they determined that it wasn't just about filling the calendar, but it was about actually having the right connection of people and doing things in a way that balanced all of our lives so that we can continue to do things the way we want. Because I've learned a successful career is based on a calendar that you look at that you're excited to do, rather than a full calendar that you're dreading. But for so long, our perceptions as a musician is based on how full is the calendar. So you seek filling the calendar, but after a while you're like, yeah, I don't really want to do that. And that's hard to accept sometimes, because you feel like if I say no to things, then it must mean I'm not committed to what it is that I'm trying to do. And the reality is that's not true. You have to find your path and just do the things that work for you, because being a professional musician these days involves a lot of different buckets that you need to put your energies into and find what works for you. And so I struggled with that greatly last year, but I'm in a much better place now that I've had those open and honest discussions. And I happened to put myself in situations where people were very supportive, because it was always about the mindset and the friendships first, and taking care of each other and making your life priorities your priority, which then allows you to work at a level that you're passionate about and consistently maintaining a much higher level of professionalism.
Zach, you talked about that. You always you get to a point in your career where you can start saying no to things after years of saying yes to everything, as we talk about. It's like, say yes to every gig, get experience. But at some point you have to turn that faucet off, and you have to start being discerning about what you say yes to, so that your relationship with music and drums remains at a high level, because it's kind of what we're called to do.
Yeah.
But when you get into a routine of saying yes to everything, and you're worried about bills, and you know what, you're just going to worry about money for the rest of your life. Just get used to it. I had a chance to interview Antonio Sanchez not too long ago, and one of the questions I had was, I'm looking at his resume that we all know about. I said, we're in fight or flight mode all these many years of our life. At what point in time can you stop worrying about the next gig, the next project, finding work, letting people know that you're around, you're available? And he goes, that never goes away. I'm like, damn it.
Yeah, man. Yeah. I'm reminded of an interview I did a while ago with Stephen Bidwell, who's the drummer for Black Pumas. He talked about all the years he spent in Austin, just in the trenches, just doing every gig he possibly could. And I'll never forget the quote that came out of that interview was, he said, I got so busy chasing gigs that I forgot to chase the dream. And you can define that a number of ways. You can define the dream as, landing that super huge gig with a band like Black Pumas and putting your energy in that direction, and, taking your foot off the gas of doing the 5 steakhouse gigs every week. Or to Michael's point, it can be like, I actually don't want to be playing drums and hucking gear this much because I have other shit going on in my life that I also enjoy, and playing this many gigs is kind of making me crazy and miserable. So yeah, it's always important to just zoom out to 30,000 feet as often as you can, and just look at your life, look at your schedule, and ask yourself, is this enjoyable? Is this sustainable? Is this where I should be putting my energy right now? And sometimes you don't have a choice, depending on your financial situation or a contract you've signed or something. But, I'm kind of in a situation right now where I am solidly in this gig. This Broadway tour I'm on really owns me in a sort of all-encompassing way, and that is good and right and fine for now. But I am also thinking about, like, what is going to come after this? What should come after this? How much of my time and energy can I devote now to setting up what's going to come after this? Do I, my good buddy Q Robinson always says, keep the main thing the main thing. So, do I just sort of like stay focused on what I'm doing now and keep my ass in this saddle? Or, and it's not about, getting my resume together and having one foot out the door on this gig, but it's like, at what point and to what extent do you start looking down the road and figuring out how you're going to set up the next thing?
Can I ask you a question about that?
No. I'm sick of your questions.
This is what happens when you get three podcasters together. Like, somebody take control, for Christ's sake. I always, I think a lot about what you're doing, man. And I think about how different it is than what I'm doing. And, sometimes the pros and cons of having something to be able to look at your calendar months and years out and be like, I'm good to go, and I don't have to worry about next week, next month. Yet at the same time, like you're talking about, you do have to consider at some point, every gig will end. Every gig will come to a close. And so in your scenario, I know you're probably through organic means, whether it's the podcast or other ways, you have relationships that continue to nurture for when this gig is done. But also, like, how are you thinking about your playing, your stylistic chops, your ambitions, and how that's changed over the time that you've done this show?
Yeah.
8 shows a week.
Yeah, that's a great question, and something else that's taken up a lot of space in my thoughts, because, this show is a very specific thing. Every show is a very specific thing, and it's a certain set of skills and a certain set of musical muscles that you just work every night and week in, week out, often to the detriment.
What are you, Liam Neeson of drums?
But yeah, there are kinds of music and there are specific musicians that I really miss. There's kinds of music I miss playing. There's people I miss playing with, and it's just the nature of the beast on this gig is that I can feel it shrinking my comfort zone, right? Musically and otherwise. And I know that comfort zone will naturally expand, after this gig is done. But in terms of playing, like, that kind of overlaps with my thoughts and just wondering what is kind of going to come next. It's like I've exercised this very specific set of muscles on this show. Which set do I want to exercise next? And that has to do with the type of music I'm playing and the type of setting that it's played in. I've been in this gig for 16 months. I've been in this kind of gig for about 3 years, because, before this I did the Ain't Too Proud tour. And both of them are, in the box, in this ISO booth. Where I'm separated from the rest of the band, and on this show specifically, the entire band is separated from the audience. Like, we are remote in another part of the building. We're not in the pit. So one of the itches that's getting itchier and itchier is just the experience of being on stage with people in front of people. Mm-hmm. That's music's natural habitat to me, and I think to most of us. And that's just not what this gig is. That's not what this kind of gig is. So, that's sort of my main focus. Like, the next thing I do has got to be on stage with people, in front of people. And there are opportunities that fit that bill in the musical theater world. I don't necessarily have to leave this world that I'm in and this lane that I've been in. But, there are obviously, well, scenarios and shows that put the musicians on stage are few and far between. They're getting more and more scarce. They are still out there, and those opportunities are there. But yeah, it's kind of the main thing I'm focused on when I think about what my next thing is going to be, and what I want my day-to-day to look like. I need to be on stage with people, in front of people.
I just find it funny because, we talk about being somewhat of an introvert with things, and sometimes just not wanting to be around people, and this idea of playing drums in a box. I'm sure at some point you're like, that sounds amazing. Just no one, just leave me alone. Let me play drums. And
I want to be clear. There are many pros to that scenario. One of which is I get to eat dinner during the show. Like
I know I was there. I saw. Yeah, now, Michael, did you say
yeah, I bring my salad. I start my salad at intermission and I finish it during the second act. I could be playing with fucking Zach Top or Jason Isbell or something. I wouldn't get to do that. And there are so many other advantages to it. It's super consistent. The sound is pristine. They're just, and that's why they do it. It eliminates so many variables that can make life difficult. But yeah, just the exchange of energy that happens on stage, no matter what size the stage is, and no matter how many people are in the room, no matter how big the room is. It's hard to recreate in this environment, and being able to recreate it in any significant way is not a realistic expectation. It's like going to the hardware store for milk. That's not what this gig is. It is musically and artistically fulfilling. We are playing live. It is a live gig. But
expectations are high.
Yeah. It's just, that experience of, the energy transfer and the air moving between you and being able to look over at your bass player and exchange a look like that. That's just not a thing here.
Well, over the last few years, I've started to get back into doing musical theater, not at the same level that you're doing, but it's something that I had missed doing and I hadn't done in decades. And it's something that I'm very passionate about. And I love the challenge of it. And the goal for a lot of these scenarios is not about artistic freedom or expression, because as you know, you have none in most of these situations. But the goal is getting the show right. And you'll never play a perfect show, but the challenge is how close to a perfect show can I get? And that's the thing that I find fascinating about this experience. And I had the great pleasure a couple of years back of actually being able to see the show, the Ain't Too Proud show in Toronto, and then going back a week later and sitting in the tiny little isolation booth and watch you play the show. And I was fascinated by that experience in terms of the high level of professionalism, how incredible your performance was. And I walked out of that situation thinking, I've learned something from this. And it made me want to step up my game so that I can take that experience that I learned from you and just make me that much more marketable as a professional. I'm still outside of my comfort zone, but what I got from that experience with you has inspired me to step up my game, and I'm very grateful for that experience.
Thanks for saying that, man. I appreciate that. And I want to just push back a little bit on the idea that you don't have any artistic or creative freedom in the musical theater world, because some shows are more specific than others. Some drum books are more specifically notated and orchestrated than others. But I'm very fortunate in that both of the shows that I've done tours for, I have been trusted by the people above me to make good musical decisions.
Yes.
And, they haven't, on me about how to play specific things. In both shows, I could point every few bars to something that was my idea. Whether it was the interpretation of a certain groove or, a fill or something I added to the part to accentuate a piece of choreography. So in the musical theater world, I think when it's done well and when, the people in charge are good leaders, it's like, playing for a singer-songwriter. Like you are entrusted to make good decisions.
Yes,
and
for sure.
There are multiple good ways to play a drum book. And what you said about sort of like your goal is always to play the perfect show. It's like over the course of a show, you sort of zero in on what is good and what is not, what is right and what doesn't fit. And so I look at it as I think less about playing an individual show perfectly. I think more about the overall trajectory of the show and zeroing in, like sanding off edges and finding more and more detail about how to make those drum parts the best they can be. And then of course, there's what you're talking about is just the consistency of executing it every
For sure.
night. I'll never forget my MD on Ain't Too Proud is a wonderful guy named Jonathan Smith. He goes by Smitty. And you're right that like there is this perception in the musical theater world where it's like sometimes it can feel like a pass-fail proposition. Sometimes it can feel like walking a tightrope, and if you make a mistake, it's like, fuck, whatever. But I had been in the chair like, I don't know, a month maybe, and we were having this conversation and I was getting a little heady about, some mistakes I had made and some inconsistencies in my show. And Smitty looked at me and he said, listen, man, we play A shows. Sometimes your A is a 99. Sometimes it's a 91. You start playing B shows, we're going to have a conversation. Yeah. But as long as you're playing A shows, we're good. And that just really put me at ease and put me in a place of, playing to win. But like mistakes happen. Like you said, there's no such thing as a perfect show in the musical theater world or otherwise. It's just a matter of bringing your best self to the drums every day, bringing your best effort to the team, and
Great advice from Smitty, because like he knows how to like help you along without feeling the need to intimidate, because it's like I've been on gigs where like this kick pattern has to be this, it has to be like that, and it's like, dude, you're robbing me of any autonomy to then just relax and play the gig, and it's going to be worse. I also think that our interest and obsession with like actors and comedians and people that recreate things every show is something that we as musicians, even if we're not doing a musical, but we're playing, whether it's covers or other types of gigs where we're recreating the same parts or the same song, how do we fine tune that stuff? How do we make it a little bit better, especially to these professionals that have to do that on a routine basis?
Yeah. It's a fine line of like pursuing your musical goals and sort of manifesting your musical voice while fulfilling the needs of the show and the needs of the people on stage, because you're there for them. And like I said, in the best scenarios, which I've been fortunate to be a part of, like you get to check both boxes.
Yeah. Well, one of the theater companies that I work for, they film the big production that we do, and then they play it in the fall as a fundraiser at a local movie theater as a way to also announce the next season. And so the last couple of years I've gone, and it's really interesting to get that perspective, because I'm under the stage with a 10 to 12 piece orchestra, and you see the conductor and you have complete isolation from the cast because I can't see them, and you're looking at the charts and you're trying to maintain everything at a really high level, and your headspace sometimes gets in your way. And then having the perspective of being able to see the show, first of all, you go, oh, that's what the show looks like, because you didn't see the projections, you didn't see the full set pieces, because you're in a separate area. But then you start to watch the show from the perspective of an audience member, and you start to realize, hey, wait a second, it's interesting how all the pieces come together. And the things that you stressed about in terms of that little moment didn't translate to the audience. What translated the audience was the experience. And that's really important, to be able to see things from that perspective, to know that you can put yourself under a microscope, but if you've been hired as a professional and you're committed to doing the best job that you can, and you take your work very seriously, you're going to be fine. You're there for a reason. If you can't cut the gig, you're not going to be hired back. And I'm consistently hired back by this company every year to do multiple productions. And my goal is every year I want to be better than the previous year. So I'm not really judging myself on each individual situation. Although the show we did last year was Evita, which is way out of my comfort zone because a lot of it's like Brazilian music and all this stuff. And I'm a tense guy. So I'm looking at this going, okay, now I got to start playing like Brazilian sambas and stuff, and the way things are notated on the page, I'm like, if I play what's written on the chart, that's going to be the lamest thing ever. So I had to go to the soundtracks and start notating what the drummers on the soundtracks actually played based what's on the charts, because the charts, as you said, are open to interpretation for certain shows. And other shows, what's on the chart is exactly what they're expecting you to play because it corresponds with the choreography, it corresponds with the cast, it corresponds with the lighting and the sound production. But in other productions, it's there as an interpretation, and you can play what's written, or you can do the work beyond that, get yourself inside it, and bring it to a higher level. And that's what I'm trying to do. But it's a great experience to put yourself outside of that comfort zone. It's also the first show I did with a click track that was controlled by someone else in the orchestra pit based on a cue that the conductor would point at them, and then they'd have to hit the click track. And for the most part, for the productions, they nailed it. In rehearsals, they did not. So now you have the scenario where you're listening to a click that's not in time with the conductor. And so now you have to watch the conductor who is in time that has the click as well too, but he's ignoring it. These are all the skill sets that you learn from working really hard to develop a professional career. Because if you've put in the time, you can deal with those situations. If you haven't put in the time, you can't get past that, and that's going to be your stumbling block.
Right. These real life things that sometimes, I know Billy Ward talks about like recreating that kind of thing, practice performing, not practice practicing.
Yes.
Because we can stop the click and restart it and, in our own workspace or whatever. But man, yeah, these real life scenarios, dealing with people, but also doing it in a way that makes you sound good musically, but also not letting it get to you and affect your attitude and the way you communicate with other people during the gig, after the gig, all those kinds of things. I think that's the thing. Those are opportunities to bring up in the podcast world. Is I joke with people about sometimes if I'm wrestling with something, a scenario, whether it's like in the studio or on a gig or whatever, like I have a question about something. I have this guest coming up. That'll be one of the questions I'll ask, and I'll get my own question answered.
Oh my God, I do that so much, and I'm kind of ashamed to admit, like there have probably been a few times where I had sort of a burning question about myself or about music, or like there was just something I was wrestling with, and I just put it to whoever my next guest was without much thought as to whether or not it's something they want to talk about or whether or not they're a good person to answer that question. There have been some interviews where I've just been like, I need answers. Do you have any answers?
Answers. Yeah. Dude, and if you need to, just edit it out.
That's true.
Well, and to be honest, when you guys do that, those are actually some of my favorite episodes, because I love the fact that sometimes it's like, I can ask the questions that are on the page, or I can take this 1 hour opportunity that sometimes is the only opportunity that you're going to ever have to meet some of these people and chat with these people and ask that question. And usually they respond well because they're so sick and tired of being ask the same questions that everyone else always asks them, that I think that's one of the things that I love about your podcast. I know for both of you, there's been times when I've listened to an episode that you've done that I really needed to hear because there was something that you discussed that was pretty heavy that corresponds with something that I'm struggling with. And I'm like, wow, I needed to hear that. And so I always reach out to you guys to tell you how important those episodes were. And I think, when you're being real and open, it makes the discussion that much deeper.
Well, I think that goes back to the things that I think Zach and I really need to know, because and keeps it interesting for us. And again, some of these people we're having on, like you are, Michael, are people that have made themselves available to many different platforms. And there's so many podcasts out there now that, that the opportunity to bring something new to the discussion is not only interesting for the listener, but really it just makes it fun for us. And you've tapped into that, man. You've really tapped into that. And I think that's, it's just like music and drumming. It's finding your lane that feeds your soul and your voice. And to try and pretend to be anything else is not good. I mean, I feel extremely fortunate to have found Zach and to be in partnership with him on this podcast, because I feel like we have similar end goals in what we want to accomplish with this podcast, and yet he has his voice and I have my voice, and we could interview the same person and have a completely different discussion. So I value that, and I think that's what makes what we do a little bit unique in that way.
Well, and going back to the theater thing, I'm also very grateful for Zach giving me the opportunity to sit in the drum booth and watch him do the show. But in particular, at the end of Ain't Too Proud, he actually leaves the drum booth, goes up and actually has a moment on stage. So he gets to have a visual presence. But why I'm grateful is he came back. So I'm not still actually sitting in the drum booth waiting to be left. He actually came back. And so I was able to find my way outside of the theater. Otherwise, I'd still be there. So
I try not to leave anybody hanging.
When I saw you in Nashville, when you guys left to go take a bow, I said, I gotta go, I'll see you later.
That's right, I remember that. But you knew your way out,
I knew my way out. Yeah, I just could smell my way out. We were downtown enough that I could figure it out by scent.
Right. You caught the whiff of Lower Broadway. You're like, that way.
It was still in my shoe.
So looking back over the last year, you've both had the opportunity to interview quite a variety of different types of guests. Are there any that really stood out to you as being a really profound experience where you walked away going, man, I really learned something from the conversation I had with whoever it was that you were chatting with? Sometimes it's hard to remember because we do so many of these. It's hard to look back, but anything stick out to either of you?
I think it is hard because I think we do so much listening and trying preparation and kind of like this next guest is my world for the next few weeks. And I also have, I'll tell you this might not be exactly what you're looking for, but I will tell you something that happened when I got ready to interview Antonio Sanchez. He was scheduled at a time one morning that when we were done with the interview, I was going to have about a half an hour to walk out the door, catch an Uber, and go on a week tour up in Alberta. And so my stress level was a bit high, and I had some time because of the holidays to invest in researching what I wanted to talk about and plan an outline. I give myself about 3 days to just kind of settle in, just look at a website, look at online presence of the guest, then start listening to some music, listen to some other interviews, figure out maybe what I want to talk about. And every day, it kind of like those 3 days give me enough peace and a steady flow of research so that by the time we sit down, I know enough, but I also leave a lot of room for just natural discourse. With Antonio, I spent way too much time. And not only was I stressed before I had to catch my flight, and I was thinking, part of my brain was thinking about the tour and all the music and everything and getting on the flight. I had done so much research that I wasn't listening to him the way I normally do. I took so much editing to make it sound like an extra. And I'm honestly like, Zach, you messaged me, said, hey, that was a cool interview. And I'm like, that was, in my opinion, one of the worst interviews I have done I made it work. It was like it was, I comped the interview to make it sound, somewhat reasonable. But man, in the interview, like you could hear me like going off on these tangents and stuff. And Antonio going, yeah, well, there's a lot to unpack there. But he was so sweet and such a great guest to have in that scenario where I dropped the ball. So I know that's not the answer you're looking for, but I remember that one.
Well, I know what you mean. Where sometimes the conversation that the guest ends up wanting to have is not the conversation you wanted to have, and they're not. Their answers are not going where you hoped to lead them, and I've had a lot of those interviews too, where, you listen back to yourself and you're like, God, just what the fuck am I talking about? Just listen to the guy and go where he wants to go. And the magic of editing, bails us out of a lot of that, awkwardness and shame. But, it's made me, you asked about the last year and sort of specific guests, and a couple come to mind, but overall the experience has made me just more open to letting a conversation go where it wants to go, and knowing when to shut the fuck up, and knowing when to pull on a thread and, we can go down this road now. And, of course that happens in the podcast, but just in normal life, in conversation with friends and colleagues and my wife, for Christ's sake. It's just made me a better listener and a better talker, I think.
I interviewed a guest recently who I was looking forward to connecting with. I did a lot of research on, and it went really well, but he messaged me like the day before going, I'm actually really nervous about coming on your show, because he really was excited that I asked him to be a guest on my show. And then I found myself having to just guide the conversation to put him at ease and then just allow it to go where it needed to go. But it's interesting because sometimes you need to play different roles and you need to change yourself depending on the guest to make sure that they're comfortable in order to get the information that you want. And I'm, Matt, you and I are similar in the fact that we like to allot time to go through and research and work these things out. Zach, I think you tend to do things a little bit more. Whatever I feel to, that's what I'm going to ask. And I wish I had the confidence to do that because it's something you pull off really well. But my comfort is, preparation. And I used to write questions. Now I write topics. I don't want to write specific questions because then you fall in the habit of asking the question that you wrote down. But I write a list of topics so I can navigate where this potentially may go. And it's not always going to follow in a linear way where you start at the top and you work your way to the bottom. I love getting a chance to connect with these people and just get their perspectives and experiences, because we're all dealing with the same things. But in some cases, having less time to prep actually makes you more comfortable because you don't have the same amount of time to stress about these. You just got to get it done and let it happen organically.
I think that goes for playing too.
Yes.
When I interviewed Andrew Barr, who's the drummer for Mumford & Sons, we talked about, playing specific parts in a consistent manner. And, musical theater is not the only scenario in which that's a requirement of a drummer. It's a requirement for him on Mumford & Sons. It's a requirement for J. Rod Sullivan on the Janet Jackson gig. But Andrew said, he's like, sometimes I just have to remind myself that these parts are correct. Like, these parts are good for these songs, and I don't have to mess with them. Are they the only way to play these songs? No. But they are good, they are right, they are correct, and I can just rest in that security. So, your creative brain, talking about having too much time to prepare.
Yes.
Right? It's easy, like when you're doing a specific thing so consistently, so frequently, it's easy to start overanalyzing everything and just being like, what can I change? Can this be better? Can this be different? But if you have too much time to prepare for an interview, your questions are going to be too specific. and the answers are going to be very specific, and you're going to ask that question, you're going to get that answer, and it's not really going to lead anywhere, and you're going to be like, okay, what's my next fucking question?
It's going to turn into kind of conversation and podcasts that we don't like, that we didn't want.
Right. We I think Matt and I were on the same page from the beginning about, like, we want these to be conversations, because Matt and I have shit to say in case nobody noticed. But we want these to be conversations. We don't just want it to be, a Q&A. And I remember at one point, maybe in one of our interviews or maybe on an Instagram post or something, Dave Elitch said, like, he was like, I would never do this, but sometimes I wish I could just punch you in the face and tell you to play. Because, like, if you get punched in the face, your fight or flight kicks in, and it's just instinct, and it's like, what are you going to do? And when you have next to no time to prepare for a gig or to learn a song or to prepare for an interview, a lot of times your first instinct leads to really good shit.
I did a recording session a number of years ago, and it was for a song for like a benefit record. And it was one of these situations where the studio was booked. You had 10 different artists that got to come in, and everyone got an hour to do everything from hi, welcome to the studio, to thanks, for coming out. And that was the way the situation worked. And it was with a friend of mine who I've worked with a lot, who's an exceptional songwriter. And this was on a Saturday. And on the Friday, he hadn't finished writing the song yet. And he sent me a link to a guy doing like a Radiohead cover on YouTube. He goes, this is not at all like the song we're going to be recording on Saturday, but I kind of like the vibe of what this guy's doing, so maybe we'll try something like that. So I went into the studio the next day, never hearing the song because of the fact that he hadn't finished writing it until late Friday night. We literally got to play the song twice. It was like run through once, record a take, and then we were done. And I loved it. And it was probably one of my favorite recordings that I've ever done because of the fact that I couldn't overthink about how prepared I was for this thing. It was literally just, I have a vibe. The first time you run through is to figure out the arrangement. The second time is to get it right. And it is what it is. And I often find sometimes in these situations, those are the ones that are most musically satisfying because you don't start obsessing about perfection.
The parallels between doing what we're doing with the podcast and playing are just numerous, especially like just knowing your skill set, being prepared in ways that you can't quantify with notes and all this stuff. It's just kind of being well rested, knowing the person enough to be able to have the conversation, and trusting your experience to be able to have a good conversation. And the same with my work now, it's quite the opposite of Zach. I'm working sometimes with different people almost every week. And so the scenarios and the time feel and the songs and things like that, whether it's recording for someone a new song, a new idea, or meeting somebody on a gig, even if it's a song I played 1,000 times, it's with different people. Not feeling like I have to know every note, but trusting my listening, trusting my experience as far as knowing what works and what doesn't work in a musical sense, knowing who to listen to, like whether it's the singer who called me and, they're the one that is possibly going to call me again, and like feeling where their time feel is, and not be that stubborn person. We talk about like, this is the question and this is the answer, and shoehorning that in and how unorganic that feels. Well, yeah. Damn, man, the same thing happens on stage. It's like, this is the tempo. This is the tempo of the song. You hired me to play drums and you're singing it too fast. Well, you better, and it's like, no, shut the fuck up. That's where they're putting it. And so it's up to you to kind of like feel that. And like, I'm going to make you comfortable. And if it means playing it slower or faster, or like you decide to do 2 choruses at the end and there's only 1 on the record, guess what? We're doing 2 choruses.
Right.
And I'll go one step further and say, there's a guy I've been working with in California. And he sent me a song, and it had this riff at the top, and so I was kind of playing around with it. It was 4 bars. I thought it was cool, and he goes, "Something just doesn't feel right." And he's very gracious, and he's like, "I'm sorry, maybe I'm out of the pocket, maybe it's not." And I was able to, already established a rapport with this songwriter, and say, "Listen, if it doesn't feel right, it's not right.
Mm-hmm.
So let's figure out what works for you." So we ended up, because it was 4 bars, it was so nice to be able to say, "Listen, I'm gonna give you like 3 or 4 different versions, and then you pick which one you want, or if you want, I can edit those in and figure out what you want to do." And of course, he was more than thrilled. But my point is that when you just read the room and figure out what works, and the human skills that are involved in interviewing people, interacting on stage, communicating with your spouse, navigating, all these things, lots of different ones.
What you said cracked me up so much about like you just sort of laid bare the hubris and the juvenile inflexibility that we have sometimes, where you were just like, "You hired me to play drums and you're singing it too fast," like that. Oh my God. That cut deep. Well,
sometimes I'm playing with people that just aren't that great, and or don't have the experience, but guess what? I said yes to this gig, but there was a time in my life, and I'm like, "Bro, you don't know what you're doing. I got, let me show you." And it's like, that's bullshit, man. It's like,
yeah, I mean, there's a way to do it without being a stage bully, and you gotta, like you said, be able to read the room to, sometimes you gotta hold the line. Like sometimes you gotta lay it down and hold the line, but not all the time. Just because you're the drummer doesn't mean that, you're judge, jury, and executioner, when it comes to all that. And I'm just realizing that, talking about the parallels between podcasting and doing interviews and playing, I was giving myself so many pats on the back about how far I've come as a listener and a conversationalist and da 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 da. And I'm realizing like I still have more work to do in that regard when I'm behind the kit. My flexibility and my receptiveness and my sort of amicability and my willingness to be part of a conversation that I didn't anticipate necessarily. Like that's all, that's come a much longer way, I think, in conversation and in interpersonal relationships than it has behind the drums. So maybe,
I want to add on to that. And this maybe checks a couple different boxes when I look back at the last few guests of the last year or so. One of the guests I had on, which I knew briefly in Nashville, but splits his time between New Mexico and Texas, is Rich Malloy. And one of the things that Rich said as he's kind of gone back to playing jazz, that's like the most 99% of the gigs that he does. This is the music that I love. This is what I want to do. And this is how I'm spending my time, is playing jazz. And he said something that was really fascinating. He said, "I think you could audition a jazz musician by just having a conversation, because that's what you're doing on stage." And so, I need I need a bass player for the gig. Hey, somebody recommended this person. We're going to go out and we're going to have coffee and we're going to sit and we're going to have this conversation. And just based on that conversation, you could almost make a determination of whether that would be a good fit for that band or not, based on improvisational music.
Right. And if you come away from that conversation, like assume you haven't heard this person play a single note, right? Mm-hmm. If you come away from that conversation hoping, like, if you just dig the shit out of this guy and you're like, "Oh man, what a vibe, what a cat, man, I hope he's halfway decent," right? But then the flip side of that is if you come away from that conversation just not digging that dude at all, you come away thinking, right, I don't give a fuck. I don't give a fuck if he's Jocko or Ron Carter. Like, I'm not playing with that dude. And it reminds me of, I saw this thing on Instagram a while ago about, like, we talk a lot, we're all familiar with the 3 points of saying yes to a gig, right? Mm-hmm. It's like good money, good people, good music, and you got to hit 2 out of 3. And this guy on Instagram was like, that's true a lot of the time. But if the 2 out of 3 that you hit are the money and the music, but the people suck, he's like, that's a no. That should be a no. Like, unless you really need the money, or unless you don't get any other opportunity to play that music or whatever, like the people can be a deal breaker in a way that money and music cannot.
Well, it also comes down to podcast guests, and there are many people that have had fascinating careers that have a wealth of information, but there's something about their story that doesn't necessarily resonate with the story that I want to get into. And so it has nothing really to do sometimes with the status, because it's usually there's something that's an aspect in their life that I found interesting and inspirational, and that's what I want to get into. And I know both of you have had like people reach out to you sometimes because you're one of the biggest and best drum podcasts out there. So I'm sure you get bombarded all the time with people that want to come onto the show because they've got a great story to tell. And you have to be selective in terms of the yeses, because it's not always just about the story that they have to tell. It's about the story that you actually want to hear. And it all comes down to the community. It's like if you connect with someone, and someone that you've connected with sends someone your way, there is something of value in that experience, and those tend to be the guests that I want to chase, because someone sees something in value in terms of what we're doing, and they want to invite someone else into that community. And it's been an interesting process.
Well, I think that it's really important to recognize that sometimes guests that we're not even sure about or we don't know about, or maybe we feel like we can't relate to their story or their journey, where they are in their journey. Like one of my last interviews I had, who I'm getting ready to put out tomorrow, is a young guy who's in his early 30s, but he had in our conversation, in our interview, he talked about some things that I can definitely take away some of his experience and kind of utilize that in my own life in ways that I would not have expected. And I think after doing this for so many years, I realized that sometimes that information and those realizations are unexpected. I can't predict them. Now, that being said, we do get emails, and oftentimes as soon as I see them through some sort of agent or some sort of publicist, and I could tell that Working Drummer podcast was plugged in to this kind of set email, and then it's, I'm like, you don't really want to be on our show. And podcasts have become such a normal way to do like a press junket, if you will, for your client. They've got a new record out, they've got a new book out, different things like that. Sometimes you could just smell that it's just not cool. So it's not about what the people, and I think what we were able to get right from the very beginning is name this podcast Working Drummers, so that it left the door open for many different players in different states and stations of their career, so that we weren't relying on high profile names. But I remember a friend of mine who was the original drummer for Counting Crouse, and seeing him in the airport and saying, dude, I would love to have you on the podcast. He's like, man, I'm not really playing full time anymore. I'm like, all the more reason to talk to you, and different people who have different jobs and different things, because it just gives us the opportunity to do that. And that's the stuff I love to lean into.
Well, and I think it was Zach, you had the pleasure of interviewing Dave DiCenzo.
Yeah.
who I had on my show, and Dave's just an amazing guy with an amazing wealth of experience. But he came on the podcast going, well, I'm not really, like, even though he teaches at Berkeley, he's like, well, I'm not really working a lot these days, so I'm not sure if I should be on the Working Drummer podcast, because he was dealing with some stuff, and so it kind of took him out of the performance game for a while. And it's like, no, but there's still a story there to tell.
Yeah. Like Matt said, it's like all the more reason that I want to talk to you, and the reason that he wasn't performing very much anymore is because of a shoulder injury or condition, and he was very gracious in talking about the physical aspects of what he was going through, but also sort of the emotional and psychological aspects of not being able to play as much anymore. And it just led to a really great conversation. And, that I guess that's an example of just being open to the conversation that's there, instead of clinging to the conversation that you thought you were going to have,
Yes.
And it's funny you mentioned him, because I like when I think back about sort of milestone guests, I think of it in terms of like these sound bites and these quotes. I don't remember entire interviews, and I don't remember an interview that sort of like changed my whole perspective on something, but I do remember like quotes from interviews, and one of them was like, I mentioned Stephen Bidwell saying, I got so busy chasing gigs that I forgot to chase the dream. Dave DeCenso was like, I was just kind of asking him like about he's played with such a huge variety of artists. And I was like, what's is there a through line? Is there a way that you sort of bring your voice to all the, I don't remember my question, but he basically said, I've always been a backbeat drummer. and that resonated so much with me, because it's like, it's like the title of our podcast, like working drummer, like you can define that so many different ways. And when you think about a backbeat drummer, like you can define that a lot of different ways. And it's kind of how I started thinking about myself, despite my deep jazz background, even when I play jazz, even when I listen to jazz, like I want backbeat. I need backbeat. Yeah. So like the couple other little quotes that leaped to my mind over the last couple years the last year, I interviewed this guy, Murphy Ocamp, who's a New York drummer. He's from Miami. He still works some in Miami, but mostly New York. Just a hellacious drum set player, amazing conguero, does all kinds of Afro-Cuban shit, studied with Daphnis Prieto, also studied with Steve Rucker at University of Miami. And I was asking him about Steve's curriculum, and he was like, the first year was a lot of just sort of learning how to be a useful drummer. Like,
wow.
They weren't getting into crazy improvisational, or transcription or whatever. It was just like, here's it's going back to serving the music. But the way the words that certain people choose to sum something up really sticks with me. So Dave DeCenso saying I'm a backbeat drummer, and Murphy Ocamp talking about his mentor. It's like, we're going to talk about ways that you can be a useful drummer to a lot of different people in a lot of different scenarios. And the one other one is the last interview I did with Sean McDaniel, who's just the benevolent mensch king of Broadway drumming at the moment. But we talk so much about serving the song. We talk so much about serving the music. In the context of a musical theater show, Sean used the phrase "serving the drama," and in every show there is a literal story being told, and there are literal characters going through literal shit. And he talked about how what you do on the drums should be informed by the headspace of the character that you're playing behind. Like, what is this character going through in this point of the story? What is their emotional motivation? Like, so just that deep a perspective on his job as a Broadway drummer stuck with me.
I remember early on when I interviewed Chad Cromwell, he brought up this idea of backbeat drummer, being a backbeat drummer. And, when you grow up and you're trying to learn every style and be, jack of all trades.
Yep.
I'm like, oh yeah, because people are like, well, what kind of music do you like to play? And I was like, oh man, how do I define that? And so I'm always like, well, I just like to play with good people and good music. And it's kind of true. And, sometimes I get called to do something outside of like a backbeat thing, but not very often these days. But again, being the backbeat covers so much, and someone like Chad, who I looked up to, or I continue to look up to as just a Nashville cat, he covers so much ground and has created a career that is something that I've always strived to be more like. And I'm like, oh yeah, you can be a backbeat drummer and cover so much ground.
Being a student of the instrument, there is the joy of just expanding your encyclopedia of styles and feels, but we all have things that we're passionate about. And I think it's always important to make sure that you remain most dedicated to the thing that you love the most, because that's the thing that you're going to be the best at. But it's important to learn different things, because sometimes there's going to be scenarios where that thing that you invested some time in suddenly shows up, and it's going to allow you to get through something outside of your comfort zone. Like I have a friend that he's a film composer for independent films, and he hires me all the time to play on different film soundtracks. And he usually sends me note for note drum charts, which I like, because then it's less prep for me. I literally just read the chart down. But I never know what it is that I'm going to play, so sometimes it's like a bluegrass thing. And sometimes it's like, do you want to play 80s metal? Sure, absolutely, I do. Send it my way. And then he recently sent me something, and he said, I have a track that I want you to do. I'm like, well, stylistically what it is. And he said, well, think of it as like Clompy Circus into like 80s mystery cartoon. And so I'm like, okay, Barnum and Bailey Scooby-Doo. And he's like, that's exactly what it is. So but because I have at least an understanding of what some of these different things are, even though I can play the notes on the page, it's about playing them in the context of what the musical intention was, even if it's not something that's your forte. And so I always tell students, you have to, listen to different types of music, even if you don't like them, because then when you're having a conversation with the musicians that you work with, it's much easier to understand context, because someone in your band isn't going to tell you, okay, I need you to play 16th notes on a hi-hat where you're going to then play an accent on this one, and then you're going to do they're not going to do that. They're going to tell you, play something in the style of X. And if you don't know what that means, then you're missing the boat. So it's always important just to be open to different things, because you'll always take some element of something that you've learned that is going to benefit you in those situations.
Yeah, I remember interviewing my good buddy Ty Bailey. It was, once in a while we interview a non-drummer. Yep. And Ty is just a shit hot B3 keyboard player. And sort of during that interview, it dawned on me that like Ty studies music really seriously. Like he prioritizes listening to a lot of different stuff, and being up on the latest stuff. Being up and familiar with the popular shit that the kids are listening to. And it's not because he's gunning for the gig with Chapel Roan. It's because, like you mentioned, that thing is going to be referenced by somebody he's working for, and if he has at least a little bit of familiarity with what the fuck they're talking about, it's going to put him in a better position to deliver.
Yeah, I get that too, and it's like I had coffee with Steve Brewster a couple years ago. My friend Brian Zack and I met him for coffee, and I actually had lunch with Brian Zack yesterday. And Steve is one of those guys that's been at the top of his game playing Nashville sessions since the early to mid 90s. And he talked about listening to new music all the time and working with producers and musicians more than half his age, and them referencing things and him being able to deliver. and just how relevant that continues to make him as someone well into his 60s, being like an in-demand session player. I've also had conversations with amazing session musicians like guitar player Rob McNally that talks about knowing your history and understanding when somebody says, hey, we're going for like Allman Brothers, like early Allman Brothers feel on this thing, not like this era of what, you're just knowing those things. And I was watching actually a former guest talk about, you've got to listen to new music. You've got to know new music. I believe that wholeheartedly. And I feel like the podcast gives me an excuse to listen to music outside my comfort zone or something, dial into something I wasn't planning on, but then maybe even falling in love with it and it become a part of my listening routine. But more importantly, I do find myself listening to all kinds of things, whether it's learning for gigs or the podcast itself. But just this idea of like you should be up on all the new things and all this. I agree with that. But you also, unfortunately, if you want to do this for real, you've got to know your history too.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it's, you got to kind of you got to pick where you want to put your energy, and it's possible to do some of both, in terms of looking backwards, knowing the history of your instrument, knowing the great cats, knowing the people who came before you who inspire you, and it's like, holy shit, I want to catch that thing, but also being up on the latest shit. But it's just a matter of like.
Sometimes the latest stuff is a recycling of old things that people miss. Yes, for sure. And my inclination is always to look backwards. My inclination is to. It's not to. Well, sometimes it is to just listen to music that I've listened to a bunch of times before. If I can't, if I'm having trouble deciding, it's like, well, fuck, just put the meters on again. Okay. But, I'm more inclined to dig deeper into past catalogs and sort of arm myself with that immersion than I am to look around on, and say like, who is hot shit right now, whether it's whether you're talking about a pop star or a specific drummer. But it's just a matter of sort of filling your head with the sounds that you want to come out of you, It's going to work for the time,
Right.
Not to derail what you're saying, but there's this theory that people with the haircut that they have now that may seem out of date was the haircut they had when they were getting laid most of the time. And so you see that, 60-year-old guy with the mullet, you're just like, yeah, man, 1987 was good to you. It's like when you see that drummer with the China and the 13-inch hi-hats and the heavy bell ride, you're like, and the double kick pedal, you're like, I know when you were gigging a lot. But
and we're talking about versatility for being a musician, but even as a podcast host, we have to be versatile in the different styles and the different players and the different cities and stuff and the stories behind a lot of these things, because I've interviewed a lot of people from Nashville and there's a vibe there, and so those interviews all tend to take on that sort of experience because that's where they're coming from. And then you talk to people in New York, or we talk to people in LA, and there's just a certain vibe based on those experiences, and so you're going to find similarities between the stories there based on where they're actually coming from. And so you have to be aware of those surroundings as well so that you can navigate those conversations.
Yeah, for sure. But I think also, even within a place that's maybe as active as Nashville, you do have people that have a certain circle, in a level of experience that I think before I started the podcast was somewhat limited. But now, I just understand the landscape at a whole new level. When I first moved to Nashville, I worked at Forks Drum Closet for 2 years, and I got the lay of the land real quick in a way that I wouldn't have. And I think that was part of the inspiration for the podcast, is I missed that understanding of where I was trying to live and work. And it wasn't because I wanted to understand Nashville. It was I wanted to understand kind of music and drumming as a career writ large, so that's why it wasn't a Nashville-based podcast. it had to be international in many ways.
We're close to the beginning now of the new year. And one of the things that, human nature is such is that when you start a new year, you reflect on the previous years and you look at the things that maybe you didn't accomplish or the things that you want to change. And so when you're starting out something now, you always start out fresh, go, this is a new year, new opportunities, new vision, new goals, new perspectives. So for both of you, looking at 2026, what are some of the things that are your focus now that you're hoping to try and accomplish?
Barring anything unforeseen, I am going to spend the rest of 2026 and possibly beyond in the same chair that I've been in. And that is I'm so many reasons that I'm so grateful for that. And I think what I'm focused on is finding ways to move forward musically and personally without moving forward professionally, right? Because I'm not leaving this gig. I'm staying where I'm at. And just because I stay in the same gig doesn't mean I'm not moving forward professionally, but you get what I'm saying.
Yes.
I am thinking a lot about the internal game versus the external game and making it more external, being more communicative with everyone around me, whether it's to, create deeper connection with them or to try to resolve a conflict with them, trying to make the rest of the time that I spend in this gig a period of growth. Because every gig forces you to grow in some way. Maybe not every gig, but I'll just say, this gig and my time doing the two shows that I've done have really forced me to grow in a lot of ways, and that's great. And I think what I'm now thinking about is what are some ways I can grow that aren't forced on me? What are some things that I can just sort of take upon myself? I know that's kind of an opaque, esoteric answer. But there's so much about this gig that it would be easy. It can feel easy to feel stuck in a gig like this when it is the same show 8 times a week, and I don't really get any opportunity to play any other kinds of music. I don't get an opportunity to play different drums. I don't get an opportunity to play with different people. So it's easy to feel stuck. It's easy for it to feel like golden handcuffs. And I'm sort of thinking and talking about ways that I can move forward and grow while staying in this saddle.
It's almost an opportunity for you to be able to grow in other ways that you wouldn't have.
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
And also,
I there's no distractions, right? Yeah. I'm I'm stuck here, and I don't use that word pejoratively. It's this is where I am. This is my life. And, I don't have much else to worry about. And there are reasons that can be frustrating, but also it's man, you can just sit down and keep doing this show every day and do it the best you can and really use it as a time to sort of incubate some other stuff musically and personally.
Yeah, and let me borrow your gold sparkle Ludwigs.
Anytime, man.
You don't need them, man.
Yeah. They're butterscotch pearl, by the way. And
that 7x14 or 7x15 Beyer snare.
Yeah, man. So I'll give you our door code if you want to drive down there and steal it all. I'm not going to be using it for a while.
And Matt, what about you?
I resonate with what Zack says about looking ahead and growing, but not necessarily career-wise. Now, obviously, I do want to continue to nurture what's happening and change with the times as far as what gig opportunities are there, what new sounds, how AI is affecting recording, growing my knowledge of getting better sounds, but doing it at a pace that is maybe a little bit slower and a little less anxious than it has been in the past, and feel comfortable with where I'm at in my career, in my life. again, I think that comes with experience, but I will also say that in having conversations and the opportunity to do this podcast, I've learned from so many people to just, you know what, it's what's going to happen is going to happen. Now, that doesn't mean that, so like right now, I used to say in the past, people would say, hey, we should get coffee sometime. And I'd be like, you know what, I'd love that, but it's not going to happen. And I would just be kind of funny. I'd be completely honest with them. I just don't have time. I've kind of flipped that around these days. I'm like, you know what? I'm going to go have lunch. I'm going to make time to see people. And I'm not going to be chasing gigs. I'm going to be nurturing relationships. And I've been doing that a lot. I've probably been doing it 2 or 3 times a month the last few months. And I've had some lunches and breakfasts with some friends that are doing amazing things, or like really busy and doing amazing things. But the one thing I don't do, one thing I never do, is say, hey man, if you ever need somebody, call me. I don't do that. We talk about things, we catch up, we say, great to see you. If I invite them, I pay for lunch, you know, whatever. Because ultimately where I see myself being the happiest and most fulfilled is, again, on gigs, working with people that I want to work with, playing the kind of music that I want to play. But I'm also really happy with the idea of still being able to make a living playing drums with all the things that have changed post-COVID, technology in the 21st century. I still feel extremely fortunate to be able to do this full time and make some decisions about what I want to do. And for the longest time, up until I left this road band back in 2017 or so, I was saying yes to everything, and I was pretty much had to follow whatever gig, whatever. And even just a few years ago, I found myself back out on the road doing something that in a lot of people's eyes thought, that's really cool. Wow, you're playing with these people, you're doing this, you're doing that. But internally, I was struggling because these weren't the people I wanted to be identified with for a whole host of reasons that just didn't square with me morally, personality, you know, way beyond music. And I'm like, this is not how, and I mean, I'm not saying that this event completely changed me, but, you know, I'm thinking about my dad today because I came across some old voice messages that his voice was still on my phone and I listened to today for the first time. And I lost him last November or so. And I'm realizing that it's like, man, there's so many other things that are so much more important in life. And when I see people chasing gigs and like compromising everything just to get that gig for whatever reason, just to be known, it's gross. It's gross to me, you know? And I love my relationships with the people I have. I'm proud of my family, the growth of my family, and I still have an amazing relationship with music and drums, and I don't want that ever to go away.
I find one of the things that I've learned as I've gotten older is that there is joy in looking at my calendar and booking days off to do nothing, because you have to take care of your own mental wellness and your relationships. And I think a lot of times our desire to fill the calendar ends up taking away from the things that are actually really important, like building relationships, nurturing relationships, and really valuing community. Now, as I said at the beginning of this, the biggest takeaway I got out of starting a podcast was the value of community and the importance of building genuine relationships. I am incredibly grateful for the connection that I've gotten with the two of you, for the support and the encouragement I get. There are a lot of things that I think we still have left to talk about, so we will have to connect again and do another one of these. But I greatly admire what you're doing, and I truly value your friendship, and I look forward to seeing what's next for all of you. But I'm very grateful for your time today.
Back at you, Michael. Thank you so much for having us, man.
Yeah, dude, you're killing it. It's really been fun to watch you, and I'm so glad that we've, you know, nurtured this friendship for sure. I appreciate both of you guys.
been listening to the Drummer's Pathway podcast. Please share and subscribe, get the word out, and let's keep the discussion going. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.